Welcome to the Landscaping Podcast. My name is Joel Barnett and I'm your host. And today's episode, I'm talking with Curt O'Toole from Urban Elements Landscapes. Curt runs a construction company based in Geelong, and he's probably the person I've learned the most about running a business. So kind of an unofficial mentor, which I mentioned in this podcast to him as well. So he's in his 30th year within the industry, so certainly knows a thing or two about how to run a landscaping business, doing it for that long. And he also works in the residential, commercial, and government sides so works on all sorts of different projects. Has about 9 staff at the moment, but has that up to more than 20. So he's a great person to get advice from and very knowledgeable. And unsurprisingly, he's had a business coach. So it's interesting how many successful business owners have had business coaches. But he talks about the reasons he did that and the benefits of it in this chat. And he also explains about why he's built his staff up to more than 20, because it wasn't a conscious decision that he planned to do. It just sort of happened because of circumstance. So he talks about that. But yeah, should be plenty of advice to take from this chat with Curt. So hopefully you enjoy this chat with Curt O'Toole. Curt, thank you very much for joining us on the Landscaping Podcast. My first question for you is, how did you start in the industry?
Thanks for having me, Joel. I've been listening to a few of your podcasts over the journey and was waiting for the phone call. Yeah, started in the industry pretty much straight out of school. So I did my Year 12 VC at Belmont High School in Geelong, went away for the Christmas holidays with a couple of mates, came back with no real direction. And at the time, my dad was working at what was the CES back in the olden days, and said, righto, time to get a job. So he put me out to Ford Motor Company, where I worked in the casting plant out there, which is where they made the engine blocks and all things metal for cars. It was after, I think, 6 weeks there that I realised I couldn't work inside. So I resigned from my job at Ford's, went home and went, oh shit, I've got no money. I was getting paid pretty well out at Ford's at the time, like $800 a week back in 1993. So it was pretty good. My parents had just built a new home in Janja and were looking at getting some fencing put up around it. So engaged the local fencing contractor. He needed a labourer, and I started working with Shane from Shill Outdoor Constructions in, I think it was April of 1993. So Shane also did a lot of landscaping projects, both timber work, and back in the early 90s, paving was a flexible item. So he did a lot of flexible driveways, et cetera, et cetera. So we did that sort of work. I worked with Shane for about 15 months. And then I was lured up to Bendigo by a couple of mates from school. The main reason for that was I was offered an apprenticeship in landscaping through the employer in Bendigo. I asked Shane if I could do an apprenticeship with him, and he said, there's no point doing an apprenticeship. I will teach you all you ever need to know. Stay with me and you'll probably learn more. And I second-guessed myself because he did have a lot of timber skills, he had landscaping skills, and was a genuine hard worker, which has probably given me that work ethic that I carry and try and instill. But the lure of an apprenticeship and moving out of home and setting myself free was too good to pass up. So in about end of 94, I moved up to Bendigo and took up residence with a mate from school up there in a share house on I think it was $202 a week take home. Plus we used to get paid a little bit of overtime. So at the time I had a $50 mortgage on a car per week, $50 of fuel, and $60 a week in rent. So $40 a week was left for partying and food. So
Heaps.
partying took precedent. Yeah, well, I think back then a slab of Melbourne cans was $19.99 at the local buy low supermarket. So if you could get a slab of cans at the end of the week, you were pretty happy.
Okay, you're busy for a day.
Yeah, well, depends. If you'd had a bad week, it was maybe less than a day. So I did, I think, a bit over 12 months up in Bendigo. And Bendigo is a really interesting place to work. Incredibly hot through the summers, with no reprieve overnight. So you'd be going to bed at 10:30, 11 o'clock, and the air temperature was still up in the mid-30s. It had dropped to the low 30s by midnight, and then you'd be heading back out for another day of work with, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours of tossing and turning, calling it sleep, and then trying to go and produce another day's work. So really challenging summers. And then their winters were absolutely brutal. Like, I remember having to thaw out taps to run water through the brick saws. So something that we don't really experience down in Geelong, Surf Coast. Like, frost is not crazy down here. But yeah, Bendigo, it was brutal, absolutely brutal. So hottest of hot and coldest of cold that I've ever worked in. And then, fortunately, I was offered a position back down on the Surf Coast with Brian Coate from Brian Coate Landscapes. And I took that up and moved back down the Surf Coast when I was 21. So being 48 now, that puts me in my 30th year of in the landscaping and outdoor construction industry. So
Did you continue your apprenticeship with Brian?
yes, I did. I finished off my apprenticeship with Brian. My the apprenticeship with Bendigo employer was through, I think it was Central Vic Group Training or something like that. And they gave me a 6-month recognition of prior learning for the work that I had done with Shane down on the Surf Coast. So, and then once I moved back down with Brian, I completed the last, I suppose, 18 months of my apprenticeship. And once I'd finished all of my schooling that I completed up at Holmes Glen, Brian signed me off as an early release. So I think I only did, in essence, about 3 years of on-site landscape apprenticeship, which was, I suppose, a credit to what I'd learned in those early years with Shane, timber skills and general work skills. And then the schooling part of it, when you go in there almost as mature age, I suppose I was nearly 20 by the time I started up at Holmes Glen. It was, the hardest part was actually relearning how to study after having been out of school for a couple of years. So Holmes Glen was a magnificent place to learn your off-site craft. But yeah, the apprenticeship itself, I actually really enjoyed. I still enjoy like doing what we do.
What was the company Bendigo's work like compared to Shane's? Was it a similar standard?
Very similar in, I suppose, the standard that we're expected to deliver, but the tutelage that we were offered up there was probably a little bit less. Our employer up there had a young family, and so there was probably a lot more reliance on the more senior staff to guide the projects. We generally ran a team of about 5 or 6 guys up in Bendigo, and the employer up there was, he actually had a nursery as well. So his love affair of landscaping was primarily in the plant part. So if we were building something, he relied on the skill set of his senior guys to do it.
Yeah.
But they did do things a lot differently than the way I had been shown. And he took that as I didn't know as much, but it was just a different way of doing things. So back in the early 90s, all we used to lay was clay paving. So the 230 by 110 clay, I suppose, bricks, and be it 50 mil or 65s. That was what paving was. If you were lucky, you got to go and do a bit of crazy pave on concrete. So, but yeah, it was a lot different to what we're doing nowadays.
And then when you went, Brian, how long were you there for?
I think in total, I did about, must have been nearly 5 years. So I completed my apprenticeship with him, and then I started subcontracting to him. So back in the olden days, before the GST and all that sort of stuff started, we used to work on a thing called, I think it was called a provisional tax system. So your employer, when you were a subcontractor, used to withhold your tax. So I would say to Brian, okay, I'm working for $20 an hour. And he'd go, no worries. He would have to calculate the tax out of each invoice that I sent to him. And he would withhold that. And then at the end of the financial year, he would lodge his contractor's tax versus PAYG tax, etc., etc. So it was quite interesting times because the reliance was more on the business owner than the contractor to manage their own funds.
So would you be getting paid $20 an hour out of that, or would you get whatever it was less?
So yeah, it was $20 less whatever the tax rate was.
Yep.
So it was pretty much as if you're an employee and you were taxed on that rate. So if I worked 50 hours for Brian, there was $1,000, and I don't know, back then maybe the tax rate was 20 cents in the dollar for earning $1,000 a week. So he would pay me $800.
Yep. And then where'd you go to after working with him?
So straight after that, I was out by myself. So I asked Brian for a pay rise. I thought I was delivering good work for him and managing some projects for him, utilizing some of his apprentices and delivering projects, and approached him and said, oh, I think it might be time for a bit of a pay rise. And he said, well, unfortunately, you've hit your earning capacity with me. If you want to earn more, it's time to spread your wings. So on the same day that I did that, we signed a contract to build our first house. So I was theoretically out of a job and had just signed up to build our first home. So
perfect.
Yeah, rather stressful, but when you're 24 or 25 or whatever I was, it didn't matter. You just put your head down and kept on going.
So how'd you get work to start with?
Well, Brian was kind enough to any overflow work that he had, he would refer on to me. But I suppose, like we all did, it was a little bit of word of mouth. 90% of my work back in the early days was around Torquay. So the housing industry down in Torquay was primarily custom builders back then. So there wasn't a volume home market, but you'd reach out to a couple of those custom builders and there'd be a job here and a job there. But when there was one person, the amount of turnover you had to have was minuscule to what it becomes once you start employing. So like one $10,000 job would keep you going for 8-10 weeks, and you'd be going, sweet. All I need to do is pick up another one of them and they'll be due for a holiday, and away you go. So it was, I suppose, low turnover, but most of it was labour. So yeah, there was no real risk back in the early days. But I was quite fortunate. My wife had a full-time job. So if I had a lay day, which fortunately I never did, Kylie was able to, I suppose, support the home loan.
And then when did you go on and put your first employee on?
So I stayed probably fairly solo for the first 3 or 4 years. I was scared. I was actually scared to employ because I didn't want to ever have to tell somebody that I didn't have enough work for them and they weren't required. So in doing that, I probably did way too much myself because, as we all know, landscaping is 90% neck down, 10% neck up. So you generally push yourself harder than you should in those early years. But yeah, I suppose 3 or 4 years in, I put on a young fella who was based down on the surf coast. Young fella did maybe 4 or 5 months with me and then rang me up one Sunday and said, "Oh, I need to call in for a chat." So I said, "Yeah, no worries, come round." And so he called into the house and told me that he had lost his license 3 weeks earlier for drink driving and crashing into a fence. And he was off to court on the Monday. And just thought he'd better let me know. So
Did he drive around and tell you that?
Well, better than that, he'd actually been driving one of my vehicles, well, my only work vehicle, whilst he was unlicensed. So if he had have crashed it, I probably would have been left holding the can. So needless to say, his position with Curt O'Toole Landscapes ceased, but the tirade that I copped from his carer, grandfather, I think, was, yeah, pretty good. And then after that, I just sort of thought, oh, well, I can't let one bad egg ruin the whole thing. So tried another guy, another young apprentice, and just didn't work. Tried another one, tried another one, tried another one, and then finally landed a good apprentice. And I went, oh, wow, this is really good. This guy thinks and he's doing what I ask and he's not trying to hurt himself, etc. So then I went, oh, but when I leave site, I'm leaving the apprentice by himself. So there's the risk that one person will hurt themselves. And I needed to then give him somebody to lift the whacker on at the end of the day. So you put on a second person.
So when I first met you, you didn't. It was while I was working as an employee for InStyle, and you were giving us a hand on what turned out to be a nightmare paving job. So had you had all these employees before then?
The junior ones I had, and then I think around the time, well, in 2005, Kylie and I had our first child. So I think around that time, I decided it was easier for me just to go solo again. And I went, nah, this will do. I'm pretty happy by myself. I didn't have to be answerable to anyone. If I needed to nick off early to help out, I could. So, yeah, I think I gave the employee time a bit of a break. I think I went, 3 or 4 years. And I still have it ringing in my ears from Dean Clifford saying, don't be a fool, put on somebody. You will kill yourself doing this by yourself. So that still is probably something that has rung true. Don't do it all by yourself. You will hurt yourself.
It is profitable though.
Well, It is until you have to have that day off because you
Yeah,
hurt your back
yeah,
or
months off.
so. Yeah. So you thought the whacker only weighed 70 kilos, but that's what it said. But yeah, when you stretch down and go to pick it up and put it on your ute, that 70 kilos felt awfully heavy at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
It does. Somehow gets
Mm.
heavier. Yeah,
Most
so the
definitely.
job we worked on together, we had, I talk about it, I reckon, at least twice a year because of how insane it was. So there was 12 pallets of classic stone pavers, 500 by 500, and we started laying a few, and then the client noticed there was chipped corners on them. So they weren't big chips, but they were enough that they wanted them pulled up. So we had to pull those up and go through all the other pallets and pick the ones out with the chipped corners. And there was 12 pallets there. And I think we sent back 9 pallets.
Correct.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we went through each one, picking out the chipped corners and sent back 9 pallets because I think they were busy. So they had a second, they'd usually only have one machine, which would pick up the pavers like a claw to stack them. And they put on a second one, but they didn't calibrate it properly. So it was chipping heaps of pavers as it picked it up. So so that
And
was a great experience.
I still remember the supplier coming out and saying, no. Anything less than a little fingernail is deemed a
Within tolerance.
acceptable blemish.
Yeah.
And well, that's okay, but the client won't accept it. So who's going to pay for the chips?
Yeah. I wonder who did. So, yeah, because I was pretty early in those days, so I didn't know. I didn't think much about that sort of thing. But Tipper Jack didn't do too well out of that one.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. I never ever heard back as to whether it was compensated for our labour for lifting, relaying, or even the labouring. Because I remember there was issue with our access on that project. Like all the pallets were either specially forked into the backyard or they had to get something different to do it because you couldn't just grab them.
So when you
Oh,
go,
yeah, sorry. The client had a very precious nature strip and we weren't allowed to drop anything on the nature strip. That's right.
I don't remember that part of it.
Yeah.
But it's one of those jobs. Like I remember just about every job, but yeah, there's some that you remember more than others. That was wild.
Yeah. And you say that, and I still remember where I've put solenoids in on irrigation systems for Brian back in the mid 90s. So I can go back to a job on South Valley Road and go, the solenoids were over there. And sure enough, go over, scratch back 6 inches of mulch, and there's the valve box. And you
I wish I
go,
did.
it's probably one of the things that has stood me in good stead, but also causes you issue is when you've got a memory like an elephant, you never forget. And unfortunately, you start to fill up the gigabits of brain space. So, and some of it's trivial, some of it's good.
Yep. So when you decided to put an employee back on again, did you go with your apprentices then?
I think it was either Lindsay Cole from Flintstones came on as a labourer. Lindsay wanted a break from stacking wood at Flintstones, so he either came on with me or it was a young apprentice who we both knew from InStyle transitioned over to Curt O'Toole landscapes at the time. And it was either or. They were both very, very similar in the timing because, I didn't ever want to leave one of them alone, primarily so that they had a second set of hands.
Yep.
But then, as we know, with apprentices, well, back when I think both myself and my first apprentice started to do trade school, we were on block release. So it was a week block of trade school. So at the time, I think this apprentice had started, he was already at, what was the one over near the mental asylum in Yarra Bend? Is
I have
it
no idea.
Polytechnic or
Oh,
something
is
like
it
that?
Melbourne Polytechnic?
Yeah, Melbourne Polytechnic. So was also another landscape trade school. So he had enrolled there, so he went there, and he actually picked up landscape apprentice of the year in his third year. So
Oh,
he was quite talented, and has since realised that actually building them hurts. So he's now off drawing them. So he upskilled and went over to landscape architecture. So he's done very well for himself in the landscape industry.
yeah, nice. And then when
But
did you?
yeah, as I was saying, when you start to employ apprentices and you have either yourself or a cover person there for them, when you start to lose them for a week, you then need to put on another person to cover for the apprentice. So we ended up putting on a labourer to help the labourer and the apprentice. So from one, it went to four quite quickly. Four was a pretty good number, but it was pretty much one job at a time. And if you had to go and do something else, that job would pause and then you would return as soon as you could. So back in the early days, Brian had also referred me on to where his work stream in Geelong was, which was Malyshev Villages. So Malyshev used to do their excavations, and then we would come in and do their, I suppose, pre-slab retaining walls so that the construction on the house could start. So part of the agreement with them was that once the cut was done, we would sort of drop everything and go and do it. So that was how that deal worked. But then a lot of the jobs that you would do the pre-slab retaining wall on, you were the first sign of a landscaper that client had seen also. So in some ways, it gave us a good lead for getting the landscape, but sometimes it actually bit you in the bum because a lot of the time the site costs and the retaining walls was just an estimate from the builder. So when you give the builder the retaining wall cost of $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 and they pass that on to the client goes, oh shit, we didn't expect that. So that was their landscape budget that we'd chewed up in just giving them a flat site to build their house. So probably one of the things that in landscape has always been one of the big ticket items has been the retaining walls, etc., around houses.
Yeah, they surprised me as well when I quote them. Like you do a retaining wall quote and think, no, that's just chewed up a quarter of the budget, just to do nothing really, to make it
Yeah,
usable.
yeah, just to give usable space. And I suppose in trying to keep costs down on these retaining walls, they were primarily a pretty archaic system of treated pine sleepers and steel section concreted into the ground. So when you did go back to do the landscape, more often than not, the client was going, "Oh, how do we make this shocking-looking retaining wall attractive as part of our landscape?" I'm going, "Well, it's pretty hard now." So we came up with all sorts of different ways of cladding them in cement sheet and rendering and battening, and I suppose the term that we used was polishing a turd.
Yeah.
And you could do it sometimes, and other times it just didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah.
And then when did you change to Urban Elements Landscapes?
I was trying to think about that, and I'm pretty sure it was about 17 years ago. So,
Was it?
yeah,
Nah.
live. I was building a project in Purrumbete Ave, and I was pretty sure that Liv was 1 or 2 years old. So when we did that project,
All right.
so I'd have to have a look back through the ATSIC registrations and that sort of thing. But yeah,
Well,
and primarily that was to take my name out of the branding, because when it's your own name in your trading name, people expect that name there. So taking away the Curt O'Toole and transitioning to Urban Elements, I thought would give me a bit of separation between the wants, needs, demands of our clients, and theoretically, anybody could go and do their project. But as we all know, that's not often the case. So the client's needs, wants, and demands are always met by the business owner. So,
have you ever had a business mentor or anyone who's taught you anything about running the business?
yeah, most definitely. We engaged a business coach 6 or 7 years ago, and we were sort of at the crossroads. We had a very, very strong business, and we were turning over lots of work, but the profit was probably not where it should have been. For the amount of effort we were putting in, we sort of thought there needed to be more reward. So we engaged a business coach to try and teach us how to, I suppose, reap reward for the hard graft that we were putting into the business. Both Kylie and I have sort of been intrinsically linked to UE since its inception. And this guy, Dale, we engaged him to make it worthwhile. And I think we've probably all been at that point where you go, I'm working my guts out. I'm not earning enough. It's make or break. I'm either going to continue with this or throw my hands up in the air and go and try and find something else that I want to do. And I did that at that time. And I went, it's a shame. There's nothing else I want to go and do. So, but yeah, Dale came in and gave us a lot of tips, tricks, and methodology for measuring your business and how well it is performing. So he also did some very interesting things, which were personality testing on both Kylie and I. So mainly to see which way we both went about the decision making and all that sort of thing within the business. So ironically, the pointers in that showed that I was a thrill of the chase, but when it got to the last 5-10% of the project, I'd lost interest and moved on to the next one. So the last 5 to 10% of the project is where I believe you lose 50% of your profit. So by me moving on to the next project, to those closing out stages was probably where a lot of our profit margin was going. So whilst I knew it, I couldn't change it at the time.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it sounds very familiar, and it blows me away how long it takes to finish a job. When you think you're at the end, you think, oh, yeah, he's got a day left, and then a week later, he's still there.
Most definitely. And it's the little 1% things that you go, oh, that won't take too long. But you turn up and you go, I needed a 6 mil SDS drill bit, not an 8 mil. I'll have to go and get it. So you scoot off and grab that. You come back and you go, yeah, all set to go. The phone rings and you're talking to somebody, and then you go, now where was I? And they're I think, the things that cost so much money. And it's just that little trip to Bunnings and you get waylaid on the way back and you have a wander through the nursery because you think that there might be something that you could use to finish off that project. So it's that wasted or learning time, call it what you will. But yeah, that was another thing that our business coach got us to measure was staff efficiency. So even down to things like the wheelbarrow tire is flat. So you need to pump that up. Well, there is no productive time of contributing to the project when the wheelbarrow is flat. So it's dead time. Not only has it cost you the time to pump up the tire, but it may have delayed the person who was on the machine filling that wheelbarrow. It's all those double whammy things that once you start measuring it, you go, oh, yeah, that's where my profit margin went. But until it's pointed out to you, you just think it's part of a day's work.
Mm.
So, but yeah, Dale, we've since finished up with him because staff numbers have reduced. A lot of his methodology was about HR and measuring HR, so staff performance, all that sort of thing. So now that I am a lot more hands-on with the staff, if there's an issue, we discuss it at the time. Whereas we used to rely on our supervisors or our team leaders to come back to us and say, this has happened, okay, make a note of it, put it down as part of their performance review. And yeah, we could follow it up at the appropriate time. But I think nipping things in the bud as they start to happen is a lot more efficient, especially for my brain space, because I don't forget and it starts to fester. Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, I'm probably very easygoing with the staff, almost to a fault. And I think that's almost a personality trait. Like, I like people. I like to get along with them. But if they're not doing the right thing, I find it really, really difficult to pull them into line. So, yeah. Hence I've tried construction managers, business managers, all for this. It's almost a separation between myself and the staff, and also myself and the clients, so that I can freewheel a little bit and do what I want.
And did he teach you anything about working out how to charge the right amount per person?
Oh, for sure. And without measuring productivity, measuring expense, you're really just throwing numbers around in the air. Yes, there's the competitive market that we are all part of. And so we might say, look, it costs $20 per 6-inch plant to supply and install. Well, if you're only putting in one, that 6-inch plant should realistically cost $250 by the time you go to the nursery, select it, take it back to the client's house, install it, give it a water, put a bit of fertilizer with it and drive away, and then have to invoice for it. Yeah, one plant, $250, and they'd go, no, you're taking the piss out of me. You can't charge $250 for that. Well, that's what time costs. So Dale was a big advocate for measuring. So you measure how long it took to produce an invoice. Okay, so that's one overhead. And then we also were able to extrapolate down from your cost to run the business, be it all your insurances, be it all your fuel, your vehicle costs, your tool maintenance, your tool purchases, your lease on yards, premises, everything like that. Then divide that down over the, I think you and I have spoken about this, but is it 220 working days out of the year? So divide that down by 220 working days, 7.6 hours of charge time in a day. And then we go, okay, so per person, we had to cover $20 was their overhead contribution. Then you put their wage on top of that, and then margin, and that gave you your charge out rate per staff member. So we used to try and break up all our charge out rates, pending whether it was an apprentice, a labourer, a qualified, all that sort of thing. But in the end, it just became very, very confusing, not only for us, but also the clients. So we've just now been able to come up with a rate, if we are working on an hourly rate, that covers everybody. And I suppose some of the guys who are more senior, that hourly rate is just, but for the apprentices, well, there's a bit of margin in there that the law of averages, you hopefully cover everyone.
I wonder if how it would work out, whether you should be charging or working out less than 7.6 hours for things like changing the wheelbarrow tyre and travel time and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so we just had our end of year catch up with the accountant, and it was brought up then about this 220 working days, 7.6 hours, and he's gone, righto, so out of those 7.6 hours, how many hours are productive? How many hours could you say are contributing towards the project or fulfilling the goal of getting to the end game of the job? And I said, well, for an apprentice, you lose them 1 day a week. So you're back to 80% straight away. So, okay, an apprentice, they're there to learn. So there's maybe another 20%. So an apprentice is back to 60%. And then you go, okay, then the unknowns, the rain, the weather, the dust in your eye that you had to go and rinse out, there's another 10%. So we factor our apprentices at about 50% productivity. Our senior guys, we try and average them out somewhere between 60 and 70% of, I suppose, productivity towards the project. And people who go, so you're saying that out of a 5-day working week, you only get 3 days productivity? Well, I reckon that's pretty fair, to be honest, when you look at how many things contribute to downtime, be it going to pick up an extra roll of Ableflex, the shovel handle broke and that was the only shovel on site. There are just too many things that slow things down. And it is my greatest bugbear, but unfortunately it's the world we live in. And Bunnings is way too convenient because they're just around the corner, just about everywhere. So
lowest prices are just the beginning too.
Oh, tell me about it. Until you walk out with an extra 3 power leads that you didn't really need, but they were at the front in the box, so I had to grab them. They were like the Kit Kat at the servo.
Okay, grab them as well.
They're just there for the taking.
Yeah. What's the most staff you've had at one time?
I think we were up around 25 running into a Christmas a couple of years ago. That was made up primarily of guys on wages as well. So I think we had 2 or 3 casuals out of that. But yeah, I referred to them as the gypsies. They would come in, take your money, and leave a shit mess and move on. They were the gypsies. So if anybody's seen any of those jippos that live over in the UK in their little caravan parks, that's sort of what it felt like a little bit. I had feet on the ground, but they were taking my money, leaving a shit mess, and not doing anything for my brand or recognition of brand. So, lesson learned, don't pick up anybody off the park bench and offer them a job because they'll generally be a jippo. So, yes, we had a little bit of attrition after that high number, but we stayed static around, I think, around the 20 mark through pretty much all of COVID. So during COVID, we were doing a major project for state government. We redid the Mallet Street streetscape from Jerringham Street through to Moorabool Street in Geelong. That was a $3.2 million contract. So that was administered by the state government's regional area, Southwest Alliance, and we worked alongside their construction arm, who was Fulton Hogan. Incredibly challenging project, not only in progress, but also when we had COVID in its early days. We'll all remember when Dan Andrews would come on a Wednesday night or Wednesday morning and tell us whether we could go to work the next day. So actually, sorry, rewind that. It was we did the green spine in 2021. Was that? Yeah, so 2020 was the first year of COVID.
Yep.
So that was when Dan Andrews was doing the Wednesday, Sunday, yes, you can work, no, you can't. So with having do it, when we were doing those sort of projects, if you were to open up a retaining wall or something like that, and then on the Wednesday night, Dan Andrews would go, sorry, guys, no more work. There was massive safety risks for the residences that we were working on. So we had to stop doing those sort of projects. So we went back to a smaller job set, a little bit less interesting. Yeah, so in 2020, when Dan Andrews was doing his Wednesday and Sunday night permission to work speeches, we reduced our exposure to, I suppose, major projects, mainly because we were worried about leaving these projects in a state where there was risk to either the family or even the neighbouring properties. So massive excavations, really deep holes for retaining walls. Last thing you wanted to do was leave them open for, well, we didn't even know whether it was 3 days, 4 days, a week, a month, who knew? So we were still doing a lot of paving works and that sort of stuff where it was just over, you'd go and pour some concrete, no problem, lay the paving, and there was no real risk. So we still managed to keep our whole team working during that time. But unfortunately, during that time, I suffered a hypertensive blood pressure attack. So I thought I had a migraine. I laid down on the bed, couldn't go to work on a Friday, and just couldn't throw this headache. So Kylie called the home doctor and they came out and she said, oh, geez, you don't look very well. And I've gone, you're telling me. So she took my blood pressure and my blood pressure was 240 over 110. And she said, I'm either calling an ambulance or you will be going straight to the Epworth. I will let them know you're on the way. So
you'd have to keep away from sharp objects or you would have burst.
Oh, it was as funny as it is now. Back then, I really didn't have any awareness of what blood pressure that high was capable of doing. It was only once I got into the hospital that they sort of, well, when the hospital panicked a bit, that sort of gave me a little bit of fear. But they also didn't know whether it was a migraine driving the blood pressure or the blood pressure driving the migraine. So I was in the Epworth in Geelong for the Friday night. And when I was in there, they gave me some medication that flipped my brain, which was supposed to knock out the migraine, which was an antipsychotic. That was probably one of the greatest things I've ever had done because you just zone out for, wow, it felt like half an hour. Apparently it was only about 30 seconds. But yeah, so they flipped my brain twice and couldn't get that under control. So then they realized that it was actually the blood pressure pushing the migraine. So I spent Friday night, Saturday night, came home Sunday. And then at about 7 o'clock on that Sunday night, I said to Kylie, I don't feel so well. Took my blood pressure again, was sky high. We headed back into hospital and I spent the next week in there under the care of not only a physician, but somebody who looks after your brain. And so I had all end organ testing, kidneys, heart, lung, etc., and came back with a clean bill of health, except for high blood pressure. So the only thing they could put it down to was stress induced.
I was just about to ask if it was stress related.
Yeah. So at the time, we had our 18 odd staff. I had a business manager working with me, and every time you would discuss something, it was all COVID related. And it was, will we be going to work tomorrow? What will we do next week? And I think my caring nature of the staff, some of the guys had been with me a long, long time. And I was thinking, well, if I put these guys off, like I said early, how are they going to care for their wife, their children? What will they do? How will they stay afloat? And so I think all of that built up and, it just caused me way too much stress. We were all trying to homeschool children. We were trying to homeschool children with internet of dial-up speeds out where I live. And when one child is using that as an excuse not to log into their classes, it wasn't ideal. So, COVID stress, I think, was real, very real. So I took that as a bit of a wake-up call and have tried to de-stress since. I have some days not. So,
now, were you like? I imagine you enjoyed landscaping initially, and then when you had that like 18 or 20 staff, were you still enjoying parts of it, or was it just sort of putting one foot in front of the other because you had to keep turning work over to keep everyone employed?
Well, the only reason I ever grew my business was I was diagnosed with a chronic hip issue when I was about 35. So I had an issue with my hip that was called femoral acetabulum impingement. So what that means is the top of your leg doesn't fit into the hip socket properly. So it limited the movement within my hip. The only way they can say that it has happened was too much heavy lifting and too much rotation through the hip. And when you think about what we do as landscapers, one, a lot of heavy lifting, two, a lot of rotation through your hips, be it shoveling, be it troweling out mortar, squatting down to pave. There is so much that we rely on our hips for that I must have just given mine an incredibly hard time in that 17 years, and it just fought back. So I got to the point where I had to lift my right leg into the car to get it to the accelerator. And I thought, wow, that's about time I should go and see the GP. So got the referral to a surgeon, MRIs. Yes, you have this, but as a 35-year-old, I didn't have orthopedic surgery cover. So I had to put up with that for 12 months. And then I went and I thought had the injury corrected. So I had surgery. They reshaped not only the femur, but the hip socket. I did 3 months of rehab and thought everything was going along well. Went back to work, squatted down and went, oh, that's not great. Put up with the pain for another few months. Then I think about 10 months after that surgery, went, oh, this isn't great. Why can't I move my leg again? Went off for another MRI and they found that I had a cyst on the front of my hip that was 8 centimeters long, 4 centimeters wide, and about a centimeter thick. So it was like having very, very overcooked gelatin placed in your hip joint. So hence the movement was restricted. went off to a different surgeon this time, had that done again, same procedure. And he actually used that same term I used earlier about polishing a turd. He said, I'm not sure what I can do. So I said, what's the alternative? And he said, replacement. And I said, oh, I think by then I was 37, 38, just turned 38. And he's gone, you're young, but we'll try this, and away you go. Should be right. So I did that. 12 months later, that had failed. Walked around with a walking stick like a very old man for 3 or 4 months. And then just before my 41st birthday, I was given a brand new titanium hip. So in hindsight, should have done the replacement as soon as it was diagnosed, because the amount of debilitating pain, injuries, etc. during the journey doesn't make you a nice person. Living with chronic pain is not ideal, not for a young family. So yes, during that period was when I decided that for me to sustain an income, I had to increase the turnover of UE. And so I put on some extra staff, increase the numbers, probably up to about 10. So we're sitting about 6, 7 at about the time. Put a few extra guys on, thought this will be sweet. I'll be able to manage it remotely, and away we go. So yeah, one thing led to another. Those 6 or 10 stayed, and then we just kept on growing from there. So yeah, it wasn't by choice, I suppose, that I grew the business. It was through necessity.
And how many would be at now?
So we've reduced our numbers back down to about 9 at the moment. So we had a little bit of attrition, people moving on to greener pastures, and with needing to become more efficient with rising cost of doing business, some guys who didn't quite tick those boxes were moved on.
And do you do job tracking of your projects as well, so you keep an eye on if you're making any profit or not?
Every single job.
Yeah. What do you use for that?
So our business uses, I suppose, a hybrid mix of ServiceMate, which is a job tracking, scheduling, diary type program. One of your previous podcast guys who you interviewed, I think they were using ServiceMate also. And then what's the cloud-based accounting system? So they link together that every single item that is purchased for a project is assigned a job number, which relates back to the ServiceMate. That's then tracked, costed, and assigned to that project through a third party. And then Kylie will get a report each week if there's any anomalies in there. And then from there, we also assign all the hours that were tallied towards that project from the staff checking in and checking out from the job. So the staff are given their schedule the night before. They can go back and look at the diary for the project. They'll look at progress photos, look at what's been happening, and hopefully have their head in the game before they get there in the morning. Some do, some don't. Some who do generally are our senior guys. Some who don't are workers.
Mm-hmm. So are you keeping your stress levels down with that many staff now? Does it help?
It's funny. Like we all measure stress on different levels. So I was told an interesting thing a while ago. Anxiety is a fear of the future. Depression is remembering the past, but try and live in the now. So you pick your poison. Do you get stress from being depressed about what's happened? Do you get stress about the anxiety about what's going to happen? So I try to live in the day even down to I don't even watch the weather forecast anymore because, to be honest, it doesn't matter. If it's going to rain, I've got to deal and adjust to that on the day anyway. If we're going to be 37, 38 degrees, no problem. We'll work until it's too hot to work. So it doesn't matter, that future part. I do have anxiety about being able to tick off the jobs that we have on our books ready to go at the moment with reduced staff numbers. But I also look at that as a challenge. So if everything goes well, no problem, we'll smash it out. But it's the hiccups along the way that are unforeseen that will cause you stress. So I suppose anxiety will give you stress, but so can depression about thinking about the non-profitable jobs or year or 10 years you had previously. So try and live in the now is my adage.
And one of the positives about having less staff, I was talking about the other day, because I was telling you how my work cover premiums have gone from 7,000 to 12,000, and you said yours has gone down because you got less staff.
Yeah. So by reducing staff numbers, you also reduce your work cover remuneration payments. So, yeah, I think last year we were paying out about 48, 50 grand or something in work cover premiums. This year it's trimmed up a little bit. But I was also just told the other day that our third-party bookkeeping service who we use had actually included some of our subcontractors as part of our work cover premiums as well. So awesome. There was a little bit of an anomaly there. So I think we've got a little bit of credit with work cover at the moment, which is something positive to look forward to.
Yeah.
But yeah, that probably leads me to a topic that's, I don't know, probably a biggest bugbear of mine is this work cover thing. Like we have to work safely within the construction industry because we are a high risk industry. And yes, we do everything we possibly can to keep our staff safe at work because I still believe staff are our biggest asset. Without staff, our capability of delivering projects is reduced. So I think if you ask any of my staff, it's pretty much everything I say to them every morning. See ya, have a good day, be safe. And they go, yeah, we always are. So, and you know they're not, but I am also probably a risk taker. So, but yes, with insurance, which work cover is, so work cover is a worker's insurance. I'm not sure whether you deem yourself a worker at InStyle. I am not employed by UE. I am the director, so I'm not covered under work cover. I have my own insurance. But there are anomalies to this work cover thing. So one of the biggest employers in Vic is the construction industry. One of the second biggest employers is the gambling industry, which wraps up the horse racing. So jockeys are actually covered under work cover. And then probably one of our third biggest employers and spenders is the AFL. So the AFL has an exemption under the Work Cover Act that none of their players included in work cover premiums. So if, I don't know, well, the AFL got paid, what was it, $1 billion for the television rights a couple of years ago. So that must generate a hell of a lot of income for a hell of a lot of people. And if they're not included in the work cover premiums when there is a known risk, I think we're all getting a little bit duped here because insurance is about protecting the minority by the majority contributing to it. So hence our home insurance has gone up when we live on top of a hill because the house on the lower part of the hill got flooded. So there should be a, I don't know, and I don't know how you change that, but it is a bit of a bugbear for me at the moment. When don't quote me on the figures, but I think is it about 17, 18 million dollars is the player payments from each AFL club for their list. And that's not included in any work cover premium. So last year, I think our wages bill was just over $1 million. So small fry compared to an AFL team. But I contribute $48,000, $50,000, $60,000 out of that towards the work cover insurance scheme, we should call it.
Yeah, it's crazy when you think of all the different costs. That's what people don't realize when they go out and start their own business. You could be earning, you see your boss charging you out $99 an hour, but you're only getting paid $30 an hour. And you think, where's all this other money going? There's things like that, and domestic building insurance is about 43%. Like the client pays for that anyway, but there's so many different costs that it just makes it like you need to know so much about running a business to actually not just be a landscaping business.
Yeah, and I think it's probably in some ways it's a failing of the education that we're delivered at trade school. Not everybody is going to go and run a business. So I don't know how they do this, but maybe it should be a module that's like an optional. But small business management, it was thrust upon me. I had no interest in running my own business. All I did was ask for a pay rise. And then next thing you know, I'm out running my own business because that wasn't received as well as it should have. So I didn't even have time to go and learn or do a small business course. I was trying to start paying a mortgage. So you just go and do it and you do the best you can. But we just sort of need some extra help, I think. Like I'm a member of VECI, which is the Victorian Employers Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We rely on them for help with the awards and those sort of things so that we know that we're paying our staff correctly, because that information isn't given out freely. You have to seek it. And some of the industry groups, be it LV or Master Builders, again, you may be on a mailing list from them and they'll send out an email and say, oh, there's been a wage increase. And that's great. But a lot of the time, when you're getting enough emails a day to confuse you anyway, you may skip over that. And then it's your fault that you didn't seek it out. So I think small business management is something that our apprentices, our staff probably need a little bit more awareness of, because it's not easy. And especially once you jump over that, I think is it 14 or 15 staff where you go from small business to medium, and then all the rules change again. So it's a minefield out there.
So where do you see your business going in numbers wise? You got 9 at the moment. Do you see it ever getting bigger than that?
Well, I've never ever measured the business by the staff numbers. I've measured the business by its demand. And if I find good guys, I'll employ them. I have no issue with employing more people, but they've got to be the right people. I love when you can find those people who have that same mindset and ability to deliver a project and be able to shoulder some of the load that I do. We had some really, really good guys on over the journey, and some of these guys have moved on and started running their own business or refired a business in a different area. And it's those guys who relieve some of your stress, because you can go, Joel, I need you to go and set out this project over in Highton. We've got the excavator coming in the next 2 or 3 days. Can you go and set up some data points give them an approximate set out, meet him there in the morning, and the project happens. And I haven't had to go there and do any of that set out stuff. So it frees me up to either go and do something that I need to do, or better yet, go and quote another project and win some more work. So yeah, the right guys, I would never cap the number on my business.
Yeah. I was on a podcast before I started talking with you. I was a guest on one, and I was talking about how when I got back into this second phase of install, our average project was like 25 grand, and now it's over 150 grand. So have you seen a massive change in the projects that you're working on?
Oh yeah, most definitely. Back when I was apprenticed to Brian back down in Geelong, I think in that period was when Pyramid collapsed in Geelong. So people were really, really tight with their money. Pyramid sort of tore a lot of money out of the back pocket of people who thought it was a bank, but it wasn't. And so people chose, I suppose, not to move house because they didn't have the money. They improved where they lived. But yeah, we were doing backyard makeovers where we maybe had a $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 budget, but that was 3 guys for a week with materials. So you'd be in, you'd lay some paving, you'd put a little circle around the clothesline, brick edging, prepare garden beds, plant, mulch, and turf in a backyard. Whereas now, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $25,000 isn't unrealistic to see as the charge for a design landscape plan, which is something that I have never ever had any interest in. I'm happy to draw up a mud map for a client, but if they're after a design, go and talk to a designer. I'm construction. I can work you through a plan and walk you through a design in my head, but my drawing skills are like that of a grade 3. So, and I think some grade 3s would have me licked anyway.
And what about the projects you're working on now? Like, what sort of value were they spending?
Well, we have a very, very diverse range of where our projects come from. So we will do a simple replant out of above a retaining wall. I'm just thinking of one. We put in 15 200 millimeter pots. So maybe a couple of $1,000 done. In, out, secure the stock, drive around there, dig the holes, put them in, mulch it, and that's a project. So it had its own job number, and unfortunately, you have all the communication with the clients, same as you do on the next project that is $300,000. Same amount of communication. Generally, there's just a few more zeros on the areas that you're treating. So we do work for domestics, we'll do work for local council, we'll do work for commercial builders, we'll do work for, like I said, state government on the Mallet Street project. We've worked extensively through the city centre of Geelong doing laneways. And then recently we just put in 300 trees up on a section of the Geelong Ring Road as a noise mitigation thing for a new estate over there. So work comes from a very, very varied stream, which is something that I've always pursued, because if one avenue dies off, there's always another one sending work my way. And I think in some ways, I learnt that the hard way. We used to be a referred contractor for a local pool company, and then my supervisor and their supervisor had heated words on the project one day, and that was the end of the referral work from that pool company. So we were doing probably 25 pools for this company per year, and it stopped with one disagreement between supervisors.
Awesome.
So yeah. But I didn't ever sit still. The next avenue of work or stream of work, we were just able to say yes to more. I would probably still turn away, if not twice as much work, 3 times as much work as we take on. So work is, I suppose, having the work come to you is the easy bit. Quoting it, estimating it, and producing, be it a tender or a quote, is the hard part. And then the hardest part of all is delivering it, and delivering it on time, on budget. So, and be that on time, on budget, our on time, on budget, or it could be that there is a federal minister coming down who wants a photo opportunity in front of a 95% complete streetscape where you have to pull all the tent fencing down, and then they change their itinerary. So there's always good times.
And do you do get subcontractors in for any of the work, like decks and any work that landscapers might do?
Yeah, we have a very, I suppose, tight, small group of subcontractors. I have 2 guys who help out with some timber work, being it a front fence or be it a deck. We just completed a deck at a primary school in Grovedale West. So it was a boardwalk over the top of a rain garden set up. And again, and you probably attest to this, as soon as you start any landscape, day one, things change. So there was 87 stump holes to do for a 36 square metre deck. So don't know how we were going to drill them all. But the landscape plan hadn't overlaid over the architectural, nor had it overlaid over the plumbing or the electrical. So the plumbers and electricians had run all their major asset lines through the 87 stump holes. So that got quickly canned, and we went back to a stiffened raft slab, and then the deck was on adjustable stirrups, bear it and joist, and then decking over the top of that. So yeah, so we poured the slab, and then the chippies came in and did chippy work for us with our assistance. These guys are getting a bit older, and they don't like lifting 125 by 125 cypress anymore. So we used our muscle to do that, and they came in and did the pretty things. But primarily, we try and keep as much as we possibly can in-house. I've found over the journey that as soon as you start to release control to subcontractors, you can be let down, and be it their wife is sick and they can't make it on the day. Well, I'm never ever going to tell them that they're a bad person for not turning up, because family comes first. But I then have to either let the project manager, the supervisor, the homeowner know that there's been a delay. We're not sure when he'll be back because his wife's incredibly sick. So then the heat comes down on me, being the business owner. And I'm happy to shoulder that, but some things are out of our control. So I think that the understanding from some people is great. Some people, wouldn't matter if you turned up on fire, it still wouldn't be a good enough excuse to delay their project. So.
Yeah, I found in COVID, people were extremely understanding, and we were working for some great clients during that time, and because everyone sort of knew that no one knew what was going on. So yeah, and everyone seemed to be pretty understanding of everything.
Yeah, COVID was a really, really interesting time to work, because unless you were in trade, all of your clients were at home. So one of the projects that we undertook during COVID, I think probably doubled in value, because they were at home. So they saw it developing and coming out of the ground. And as things were evolving, they would change it. And you would go, well, that's just extended that paved area by another 12 square metres. So it's this much more. Oh, that's okay. We didn't really appreciate the size of it on the plan. So now that you've started to box up, we'd like to go bigger. So you just keep on bending and stretching. And yeah, but I would hate to think how much extra people spent during those COVID years, not only with us, but on everything. It was just pretty easy to jump online and get this delivered, or, oh, we've got a landscaper here. Well, we'll do this while we're going. So, yeah, it was, like you said, it was good. People were understanding. But on the flip side of that, there's stories that came out from other landscapers I know where commercial builders were inflexible and held them to completion dates, even though the supply network was crucified. Staffing was a nightmare because you just didn't know who was sick at the time. One of our most senior guys, his wife worked for Deakin Uni, and she was a student counsellor. So early days of COVID, all of the international students from Deakin were having to leave and return home, and they weren't sure when they were coming back, if ever. So her counselling role became more important than my senior landscaper's role. So he became the primary carer for their children during the COVID times. So that leaves a big gap when you drop out one of your staff. But as I said, family is first, and if he needed to be home to look after his children, well, that was what he needed. So I never ever questioned that. Yeah.
Last question for you, Curt. Who do you think would be a good guest to have on the podcast?
Well, I was thinking about this because it is one of your common questions, one of the only two. There was a couple of guys who I thought you could probably interview as a duo, being Glenn and Brett from BC Gardens, probably Geelong's biggest commercial landscaping team now. Or the other one who I thought would be interesting was Sean from Greenstone.
No, he won't come on. He doesn't like talking about himself.
Well, it wasn't so much talking about himself. It was talking about his relationship, that he, I suppose, mentored you for a period there, and how he has kept himself firmly entrenched in the boutique landscape world.
No, I ran into it. I'll run into it Bunnings and talk to him for an hour. And then,
And
I asked him to come on.
You don't record it.
I know, I should do that. But I had asked him to come on early, and he said, nah. And then I said, when the 100th episode, I said, do you want to be the 100th episode guest? He said, nah. He won't come on. Well,
here's another curveball. Give Jack a call.
Yeah, that might be. Yeah, good idea.
So
Jack being the previous owner of InStyle Gardens, who I bought it off.
Correct. And I still have Jack as a friend on Facebook, and I think he's still up on the sunny coast, working as a project manager for a commercial landscaping team up there.
Yep.
It'd be really interesting to get his thoughts on, I suppose, the Geelong landscape after being out of it for a long time now, and how he thought it was evolving when he started InStyle. Because I still remember when InStyle hit the ground and I didn't know who Jack Bath was, and I'm going, my God, have a look at the advertising, have a look at the branding, have a look at this, have a look at that. So I thought Jack was quite innovative in the way he was pushing landscape in Geelong at the time. Landscape was always sort of, I don't know, we were the poor cousin to the building industry. We always sort of got to come in and scrape up the dregs after the curtains and carpets had gone in. whereas Jack was saying, no, this has got to happen first. Almost design your house around the landscape. So it'd be really interesting to see what he's been up to.
Yeah.
And then the only other one would probably be, I've been trying to think of like a senior staff member for a landscape company, because primarily you've interviewed the business owners, directors of companies, etc. But it'd be really interesting to get, I suppose, in some ways, one of the grunts to come on and tell you their feelings about being employed in the landscape world, because business owners all have similar stories, whereas I think some of the employees could have quite varied experience, whether they're taught or whether they're expected to learn of their own accord. But yeah, don't know who you could call up for that one.
Well, what the Steve Lowe, who works for Ian Barker, he's like his construction manager. I heard him on the Full Landscape podcast with Clint Adams, and that podcast episode is probably the best podcast I've ever listened to, I reckon.
Yeah, and I think well, like for me, we've spoken about dealing with stress and dealing with staff and all this sort of thing. But it'd be interesting to get it from a staff member's perspective on how they perceive their boss dealing with stress and dealing with staff management. Because you know yourself, like as a small business owner, I think we put on about 37 hats in the morning. Well, one of them's going to get lost in translation somewhere. So be it being nice to the apprentice when they've walked in, they're feeling a little bit sad, or forgetting to ask a staff, or forgetting to wish a staff member happy birthday because it didn't pop up on your calendar early enough. Yeah, there's way too many hats that we're trying to wear at any one time. So be really interesting to see how, well, one, whether they actually give a shit, or two, whether they actually even notice. We try and keep our staff quite up to date. We have toolbox meetings every 3 weeks. So we brief our staff on the progress of UE, where we're headed, what we're trying to do, hopefully to keep them interested, keep skin in the game. So,
well, I reckon you're now the new record holder of the longest episode. So congratulations on that. And thank you very much.
Where are we
at? Probably, I reckon, an hour and 40 maybe, or don't know. How much fluffing around we did at the start, but yeah. But
I did tell you that we could go for a mini series.
Yeah. But I did. I have been looking forward to this chat with you, so because I've said to the person I was speaking to before that you probably taught me most about landscaping business, and it's not like in an official role, but just in chats we've had casually.
And it's one of those things that I'm always open for a chat. Be it yourself, Dino, and I from Urban Landcraft chat quite regularly. But yeah, like if there's any other landscapers out there who are going, oh my God, this is really, really, really tough, I'm always open for a chat. And be it about the business part of it, but also about the mental health part of running a business and trying to rely on other people to produce work for you. I think it's something that we all probably dismiss a little bit, is how much it takes out of our heads, family time, brain space to actually do what we do. But yeah, if anybody needs to have a chat, always feel free to reach out. And yeah, I'm always there.
Awesome. Thank you very much for coming on, Curt. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Joel. And we'll see you in the soup, eh?